Vic Sicily commented on a video I had made previously about how exploration turns work in BX and OSE, and I thought it was an interesting comment with a question attached that I could talk about in this video. So let me read his comment. Vic writes, while we're on such a topic, one thing I kind of get confused about is combat or maybe movement in dungeons. Let's say my party rolls up a wandering monster in a chamber, and we've got a marching order with some frontliners, mid-boys, and a mage at the back. Is the marching order more or less the order of combat for a melee-focused enemy to take out the back line? How do I handle flanking the marching order of troops, etc.? If it's implied that the marching order is the frontliners taking up not just their space, but their perceived space, i.e. moving about and fighting, sure, I can get with that, but I then worry all my combats play out in a similar fashion. Only solution I've come up with is if they're in contact with an enemy, they're quote-unquote engaged, the mid-range would require the same thing before a free enemy soldier could then engage the rear rank. Let's dig into it. There's a few things here, so it might be helpful to cover some of the basics. And the interface I'm using here is playroll.com. It's just an online simple VTT. And this is Dyson's Delve level 4, I think, and his 2019 redraw of that, just for reference. So here we have a party in a room, and let's say they've engaged, or maybe have engaged, or just defeated this skeleton over here. And I have placed these goblins over here because I know that I've already generated the random encounter, because remember, usually we'll roll the random encounter and they'll show up in the next turn. So let's just assume for this example, I rolled up a random encounter. We got one, wandering creatures. It turns out it's these 5 goblins, and they're getting ready to come on the board. And let's just assume this is the GM's view. I'm not going to mess around with fog of war or any kind of line of sight stuff for this. So the party is in basically their marching order. We got some upfront folks here. We could position this if we wanted to with a mid and a back range. Maybe we could put the cleric type back there. We could do something like that if we wanted to. So here's the situation. Now, first of all, at least the way I play it, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about, well, where does a wandering creature come from? I don't ever think of the wandering creatures as popping up in a room. I always think of them coming in the hallways or spaces, unless it makes sense. For example, if a party was in here, monsters could show up over there potentially. But I generally look at the wandering creatures in a dungeon in terms of coming from these common spaces. They're moving around these common areas, and they're showing up potentially where they're least expected. So that may be the first thing. But the party's here in this room. Maybe they've already dealt with this skeleton. Maybe they're engaged with it. Whatever's going on. Maybe I had rolled the wandering creature check while the party was in this room here. They bust in the door, confronting the skeleton, and that same turn, these goblins are going to show up. So context is always going to be king. We'll roll for encounter distance, and I could roll some dice. We could say, let's say I get, 60 feet away. Let's just say we're doing old school 10-foot squares for this just to make it easy. So we can kind of count off 6 of these squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they could show up around here somewhere. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They could, show up here or here. They could be coming, somewhere in here. These are all potential locations that the goblins could come from. If we know the party has already been through some of these areas and there's nothing left there, though of course we have stairways, so some things could have come either from above or from below in this case. But if this was an area was locked off, the party's basically thrashed everything in there, then that would eliminate those possibilities for the enemies coming from. And we might still have this area here that the party hasn't been into yet. Maybe we'll say, okay, well, they can't come from up here. That's off limits, but they can still be here, coming from somewhere down here, over here. Again, I'm counting off 6, whatever, this area, basically. They could be coming from this way, or coming from this way. They're not going to be coming from inside the room unless there's some reason to think they were all hidden in a cupboard. I don't know. We don't have a room description for this, but presuming they're not going to be in this room. You can roll dice if you want to randomize which direction they're ultimately coming from. If you know you rolled up goblins and you know there are goblins in this room, then it probably makes sense to just forget about all that and say, oh yeah, they came out of this room and they're wandering up. You're playing a module. Different modules will have different setups in terms of if wandering creatures are in addition to creatures that are positioned in rooms, or if they're supposed to be drawing out of rooms. You can determine that. Let's just assume that these are wandering the halls. They're not attached to any of these particular rooms. And maybe the party's been through here, or they listened at the door, didn't hear anything, and we decide, oh, this doesn't make much sense. But there's a whole bunch of rooms back here. So we're going to say, yeah, they came from that side. So now the goblins are positioned. They're going to come in like this. So let's just let's put them on the board. So one other thing we can do, actually, let's just say we haven't closed this area up top. We can have them come from two directions. They don't all have to be from one, or they could be coming up from here. So for fun, we could say they're coming. We actually have goblins coming from both sides. They're converging. Maybe they got wind of the party earlier on, and some of the goblins took a route. Let's say that the goblins, came this way. They said, okay, we're going to come get them there. And then another set of goblins, knowing about the secret door, decided to peel off and come this way. A pincer action, if you will. When you roll for your wandering creatures and you put them on the board, you've figured out their distance, you ought to be rolling for surprise as well. Surprise for both the goblins and the party. If neither one is surprised, then as soon as they basically get to this point 60 feet away, we'll put them here, but the door's open. We'll just say, oh yeah, they opened the door, and then maybe that made some noise. And these are about right here. If neither side is surprised, then at this moment, the party will be made aware of it. They will hear, and they can decide to do what they want, or everyone will decide to do what they want. If the party is in conflict with the skeleton at the time, then you could probably just add the goblins to initiative at the top of the round. Okay, you hear squawky voices coming from behind. What do you do? And run it from there. In either case, we have their positioning already here. I mean, we're using a VTT, so we've got the squares. Theater of the mind would be about the same. You've got these three frontline folks who are engaged with the skeleton, let's say. And maybe, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe let's say we've got a couple of skeletons in here. How can you just have one? Right? Whoever heard of one skeleton when you can have three? Okay, so now we've got them there. So we know these frontline guys are occupado. Now that doesn't mean they can't move or do things. And depending on your system and how you want to run it, there's still potentially a lot of flexibility. Remember that you can be in melee, you can disengage. This rogue here, he can still disengage. But what he has to do is he has to use only, I think, a third or a quarter, I forget exactly, and your system may vary, of their movement. If they use more movement than that, then essentially they're turning their backs on the enemy. And if the skeletons decide to follow up, and the skeletons pretty much are as fast as the characters, so they will catch up, then they will get a bonus to hit. Also remember, no opportunity attacks. You're not stuck in melee. All of these frontliners can retreat. It's just how they decide to retreat will dictate if these skeletons get bonuses to hit them or not. So if they play it safe and want to retreat in good order, kind of a just kind of defensive movement, then they're fine. But they can only move like I said, a quarter, a third, I forget exact numbers, 15, 20 feet as opposed to their full 30 feet, whatever it is. They've got that. The rear line folks, they're not in combat. They can move however they want. In terms of, well, where can people move? They're in this room. I suppose maybe these should be 5-foot steps. I don't know. I'm going to keep it. Maybe these are more accurate 5-foot steps, but I'm not going to change it. So in the case where these were 5-foot steps, each one of these guys is filling in, each one of these characters or NPCs or creatures is essentially filling in their step. You can decide, or you can look at your rules to see what you want to do in terms of moving through occupied squares. Usually I've seen folks are pretty lenient with moving through allies. They could go ahead and retreat through their allies. Not so much moving through an enemy. Enemies, we just assume are going to block off that movement. I don't know why they wouldn't want to, but that's pretty much how it would go. But they still have to be able to exit in an open space. Normal combat movement stuff applies. But we got these goblins now. So we rolled up the goblins. If the goblins surprised our party, they're going to get one free turn before the surprise wears off. But that's enough for them to come in and pile in here or pile in there and get an attack off. Who knows if this door's open or not? If the door's closed, then they'll be at the doorway. If the door's open, then they'll be able to come in. This would happen on their turn if they have surprise on the party. If they don't have surprise, they could still potentially do that depending on where they are in the turn order And then, of course, depending on how the party responds. Now, the party could, if they won initiative, move their people around. They could potentially do it. Let's say the party wins initiative. They know the goblins are coming. The goblins haven't been able to move yet. Skeletons, let's say they're going last. So the party could do is say, okay, this person moves here, this person moves aside, dwarf moves up here, right? We're going to use that retreat defensive movement so they could still do that. And then maybe we'll slide the thief here. I'm not the most efficient. We did this properly, which I will just say we did. We would move a little bit differently so that the cleric slides all the way down there. So we can easily do that. And then once the goblins come in, they move up, whatever they do. Poor skeletons. Nobody's the wiser. They were facing 3 living things before. They're facing 3 living things now. But let's see now if we do it, we have a different setup. Now it's assuming that the party did get surprised, then, goblin comes up here. They all get to move up. However that would work. And if they have missile weapons handy, potentially then they're able to open the door and then fire and attack. And potentially bad news for the wizard back there, the magic user back there. What makes wandering creatures challenging is this fact that they can come from these positions that are not expected. That you have all these rooms connected by hallways, and at any moment from these hallways could issue any number of creatures, and that they can catch you in these positions which you are not prepared for, because you can't prepare for these different outcomes necessarily. Here we've got the cleric. Let's say we've done the smart thing and had somebody with some armor in the vanguard. That has its risks too, right? It's not foolproof. This crew is running just the party members. If they're back here, yeah, they could potentially turn. If they are cleric, they could potentially turn the skeletons. But other than that, they're just sitting back here. But they are safeguarding against these actions. That's a risk reward that the party can take. If the party wanted to have all their heavy hitters up front because, hey, look, we got skeletons up here, and maybe the wizard's in the back, the thief is here, because maybe the thief was the first one to enter the room, but then dipped out to let the frontliners in. Now the magic users back here, yeah, they're sunk. In a situation in which you have them in a corridor instead of the room, that marching order, again, is important, because if goblins come out of these 2 secret doors here, and then we have some other goblins positioned here, while the party is moving in this forward direction, party's headed this way, goblins are coming, and potentially you have these folks in the middle that can't do a whole lot. They have to wait until maybe this fighter can clear and get into this area where they can get 2 people and get these guys in. But the poor magic user, again, maybe she could move out into this area here to open up a space, but then that's putting her right in the midst of the goblins. So it's a tough beat. You want to avoid that stuff as much as possible. That is kind of the positioning. Everything else is going to work the way it has been working for you in the dungeon. Nothing else in particular is changing. You just need to keep track of where the party is positioned, whether you're using Theater of the Mind, whether you're using a grid in a VTT or in person, in terms of where the party is when the monsters show up. The things to keep in mind with the monsters is wandering creatures are, remember, you're going to roll for distance, and they could be far enough away that they can't impact the party before the party's aware of them. Because by the book, at least by BX, I think they get 1 turn to basically do a thing before the gig is up. So they can't run all the way up on them necessarily. If they're 120 feet away, they're not going to get all the way up there in 1 turn. So you want to make sure you give your party that, because it can be so dicey if, like in our original proposition, they've got enemies in front of them, and now you have 2 enemies going on, 2 groups of enemies coming in behind them. You want to give them all the benefits that they're owed. You don't need to make it easier. This is part of the risks of exploring, is you get in these situations, but you want to make sure that if they rolled and they got that 60 or whatever square feet, then give them the 60 or 60 square feet, 60 feet of distance, then give them their 60 feet of distance. If they're not surprised, then make sure they're getting those cues about hearing the noises, the running footsteps down the passageways, or the howls, or the screams, or the knocking of bows, or the clanking of steel on steel, or the blowing of a horn, whatever it happens to be. And then play on. Let's see what happens. Some of the most tense encounters happen because of enemies unlooked for leaping into the midst of the party who thought they had something in hand, or thought they understood the situation. They thought, oh, hey, we got some We just got some skeletons here. This is all good. Easy peasy. And maybe there's a chest back here, and we were just looking for how we're going to, already thinking about this loot. And then suddenly, wham, in they come. So I hope that helps answer the question. I hope this helps potentially explain or demonstrate how a wandering creature impacts a situation that's in flux. That's kind of the brilliance of wandering creatures, is they just add this element of unknown. You roll them up. When you get one, the next round they show up. You roll to see how far away they are. You roll to see or determine where they're coming from. Use context. You don't have to roll. If you know they can only come from one direction, it only makes sense they come from one spot, then that's where they come from. If you have multiple spots and none of them make more sense than the other, then you can roll. Just make a quick compass of whatever die you like. If you want to use four-sided die for the cardinal directions, if you want to use an 8-sided die that's got more granularity, or 6-sided die, it doesn't really matter. You're just going to be picking some kind of quadrant area of, they're coming from basically here, where are they coming from, right? Something like that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? You just, where are they coming from, more or less? And then you place them on the board. And don't forget reactions too. The goblins may be showing up, and we don't know. I don't have a context in this example, but maybe these goblins aren't necessarily hostile. Maybe they are fellow adventurers. Maybe they hate each other. And when they show up here, they're going to end up in their own fight with the party somehow stuck in the middle. There's a lot of different permutations that can happen with these encounters because you're rolling for reactions. So they don't have to be hostile. I just played it out that way for the most simplest of the options, but that added complexity of, this group of goblins actually is maybe positive, and then this group of goblins is negative. You could even roll reactions towards each other if we decide they're two different groups of goblins, two different tribes or groups or families or competing dungeon squads. These with the red shirts and these with the blue shirts. What happens when the blue shirts and the red shirts meet up? We don't know. We'll find out. That's a lot of the fun of wandering creatures. It can get a little bit complicated, but just go through the steps. Don't get ahead of yourself. Just think about each thing you need to do leading on to the next thing. If you need to, if doing it theater of the mind is kind of hard, then just rough it out either for yourself or for the party. Everybody, you can use a very abstract version of things, of the room or wherever they're in, just to give them an idea and to give you an idea if it helps track. And like I said, just make sure that you're not skipping any steps. You're not running too far ahead. Just go through and do everything and think it'll be a lot of fun. They are a lot of fun. They add a lot of complexity to very simple situations. Just like this one, we go from a really simple encounter of, it's just some undead, to suddenly, who knows what kind of craziness is going to happen now. All through a couple of rolls of the dice. And another thing I should mention, if it helps, roll them out in advance. You're still generating them randomly. It's not a cheat or anything. But then, because you've got them in advance, maybe roll them up during your prep before you play. You roll them up. Then you can have them in mind. You can just figure out and say, hey, I got 10 turns I rolled up in advance. On turn 6, this encounter shows up. The party, you don't know where the party is going to be, and you're not dictating where they're going to be. But then it might gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to just ingest and kind of figure out things. You can also roll up the reactions in advance. Also, remember, playing in something like BX, your distances, your reactions, your chance of wandering creature, they're basically, the world is rolling the dice. So you can roll them in advance, 1 or 2 in 6 chance for a wandering creature check. So feel free to roll them in advance if it helps your prep, or roll them in the moment if you like that better for a more dynamic, I don't know what's going to happen kind of feel. That's all I got. Hopefully this was useful. I'm recording this on Boxing Day, so happy Boxing Day, everybody. Game on. I'll talk to you later. Bye now.